My first night staying at Aunt Maya's villa is still very clear in my memory to this day. I stood staring at the night sky while holding a cup of warm coffee, when suddenly Aunt Maya came over to me wearing a cream-colored cardigan that made her face look even softer. "Cold, huh?" she whispered, softly as she stood beside me. I nodded slightly. It had been almost 2 months since Aunt Maya had lived alone in that villa after her divorce from Uncle Rudy. Since then, she rarely returned to the city and chose to spend time alone in the mountains. Initially, I came only to accompany her for a few days. But I never expected that the long nights at the villa would slowly change everything. Aunt Maya often had trouble sleeping. Sometimes she cried quietly on the balcony when it rained. Sometimes she suddenly became afraid if the electricity went out in the middle of the night. And without realizing it, I began to be the only person who was always near her. I accompanied her even at night, accompanying her sitting in front of the fireplace. Even often sitting together until late, while listening to the sound of rain on the villa roof. Until one night, when Aunt Maya slipped on the villa stairs and I reflexively hugged her body to keep from falling. My name is Dika. I'm 26 years old. Since I was little, I've been close to Aunt Maya because she often took care of me when my mother was busy working. Aunt Maya is different from most women her age. She's beautiful, gentle, and always speaks calmly. But behind her smile, she hides a lot of sadness that others rarely know. Her marriage to Uncle Rudy hasn't been going well for the past few years. They often fight because of work and rarely spend time together. Until finally they officially divorced. Since the divorce, Aunt Maya has only chosen to live alone in her private villa in a mountainous area far from the hustle and bustle of the city. The villa is large and luxurious, surrounded by tall pine trees, and the air is cold when night falls. But the more beautiful the place, the more clearly Aunt Maya's loneliness feels. One day, my mother called me. "Dika, try to keep Aunt Maya company for a few days. Mom is worried that she lives alone all the time." I immediately said yes. I thought it was just a normal visit, but it turned out everything was much more complicated than I imagined. The first day at the villa was calm. Aunt Maya greeted me with a warm smile, even though her eyes looked tired. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. I just smiled. How could I bear to leave my aunt alone here? Since then, I started to accompany her daily life. In the morning, we had breakfast together on the balcony while enjoying the mountain mist. In the afternoon, I helped tidy up the garden and repair some damaged parts of the villa. Meanwhile, the evenings were usually the hardest time for Aunt Maya. She often spent a long time in front of the fireplace, pensive. Sometimes she would suddenly cry when she heard her favorite old song with her ex-husband. I always tried to cheer her up. And slowly, Aunt Maya began to look happier since I came. However, our closeness was starting to be noticed by the residents around V. Especially because almost every night I was seen sitting alone with Aunt Maya on the balcony until late. One afternoon, while buying coffee at a stall, near the villa gate, I heard 2 women whispering while looking in my direction. Who was that staying with Mrs. Maya? They said it was her nephew. But why were they together every night? I immediately felt uncomfortable, but I tried to ignore it. For me, Aunt Maya was just a lonely family who needed company. Until that night, everything changed. The rain fell very heavily, accompanied by a cold wind. The villa lights suddenly went out due to a power outage. Aunt Maya, who was descending the stairs, suddenly slipped. I reflexively ran and hugged her body before she fell to the floor. Auntie's body trembled with fear in my arms. But at the same time, from out Outside the villa window, I heard the sound of a cell phone camera. Click. I immediately turned around in surprise. Someone had just taken a secret photo of us from behind the night fog. And from that moment on, slander began to slowly destroy our lives. I immediately released my embrace from Aunt Maya's body and ran out of the villa to chase after the person who took our photo earlier. "Hey, who is that?" I shouted in the pouring rain. But the night fog in the mountains was too thick. The person's footsteps disappeared among the dark pine trees. All that remained was the sound of breaking twigs and a cold wind that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I returned to the villa, breathing heavily. Aunt Maya was still standing near the stairs, holding her pounding chest. "Who was that?" she asked softly. I shook my head, not seeing her. But since that night, the atmosphere at the villa felt different. In the morning, when I went out to buy breakfast, some of the local residents started looking at me strangely. Usually they were friendly, but this time they were just whispering and glancing at me. I immediately felt uneasy. And sure enough, when I opened my phone, I saw a very familiar photo that had been circulating in the community group around the villa. The photo was of me hugging Aunt Maya on the stairs last night. The angle was deliberately made to look like we were in a passionate embrace. My hands immediately went cold. Comments from residents began to appear. "No wonder you're often alone at the villa. Poor ex-husband. He said he was a nephew, but it was strange." My chest felt tight reading everything. I immediately returned to the villa with a panicked face. Aunt Maya, who was watering the plants, I immediately turned around in confusion. "What's wrong, Dika?" I didn't answer right away. I just handed over my phone slowly. And a few seconds later, Aunt Maya's face turned pale. Her hands were shaking violently as she read the comments. Oh my God, tears were falling from her eyes. I quickly tried to calm her down. "Aunt Maya, don't think about what they're saying." But Aunt Maya looked truly devastated. "I'm just tired of living alone," she whispered, crying. Seeing her cry like that broke my heart, eh? I started to hate the person who spread the photo. But the trouble had only just begun. That night, Aunt Maya's ex-husband suddenly called. Uncle Rudy's name appeared on the phone screen. Aunt Maya seemed hesitant to pick up, but finally answered. "Hello." At first, it was just a faint voice. But a few seconds later, Aunt Maya's face turned even paler. "Oh, it's not what you think." I could hear Uncle Rudy's voice shouting from behind the phone. "You're embarrassing me. Dika was just keeping me company here. But now everyone's talking about you guys." Aunt Maya immediately burst into tears. "Bro, Tulang believes me." But the call ended just like that, just like that. The villa suddenly felt very quiet. I looked down guiltily. If I hadn't come here, if I hadn't gotten so close to Auntie, maybe none of this would have happened. However, 2 days later, things got worse. Someone started sending mysterious messages to Auntie Maya's phone. Lonely women are indeed easy to vent. A luxurious villa can't cover your behavior. I read the messages and was furious. "Auntie, just report me." But Auntie Maya just cried softly as she turned off her phone. She started to be afraid to leave the house. In fact, several times I saw her lingering on the balcony, staring blankly at the mountain mists. And that night, when the rain came down heavily again, Auntie Maya suddenly complained of shortness of breath from being too stressed. I immediately panicked. She sat weakly in front of the fireplace, clutching her chest. "Auntie?" I quickly held her cold body. Her face was pale, her breathing irregular. I immediately took Auntie Maya to the nearest clinic that night. After being examined, the doctor said her blood pressure had risen drastically due to severe stress. If left untreated, the condition could be dangerous, said the doctor seriously. My chest immediately felt heavier. On the way home, Aunt Maya just kept quiet while looking at the car window, which was covered in condensation. Until finally she said softly without looking at me, "Maybe you should just go home, Dika." I immediately turned around quickly. "Auntie SI, I don't want your life to be ruined because of you. I gripped the steering wheel tightly. Dika wouldn't leave you alone. However, Auntie Maya just lowered her head while crying even harder. And when the atmosphere was getting more painful, my phone suddenly rang. An unknown number sent a new photo. A photo of Auntie Maya sleeping in her room, taken from outside the villa window. My body immediately went cold. It meant that someone was really watching our villa every night. My hands immediately trembled when I saw the photo. The night fog outside the car felt even more frightening. The usually quiet mountain road suddenly made me feel like I was being followed by someone. I immediately stopped the car at the side of the road. Auntie, look at this. Auntie Maya, who had been silent all this time, slowly turned to my phone screen. And in a matter of seconds, her face turned pale. That was my auntie's room. Her voice was shaking violently. I clenched my fist tightly to hold back my emotions. It meant that the person who spread the slander didn't just want to embarrass us. He was deliberately terrorizing Auntie Maya. And what made me even angrier was that the person had clearly been secretly spying on the villa several times. Night, I immediately checked the entire villa area. I locked all the doors and windows. I even set up a chair near the back door and kept watch until the early hours of the morning. However, the spacious and quiet atmosphere of the villa only made my fear even greater. The night wind blew the window curtains softly. The sound of tree branches rustling sounded like footsteps. And the thick fog outside made the villa's yard almost invisible. Aunt Maya was truly scared that night. She didn't even want to sleep alone in her room. I'm afraid there's someone outside, she whispered softly. I ended up sitting on the sofa near her room and keeping watch all night. And from that night on, I decided to find out who the real perpetrator was who had destroyed Aunt Maya's life. The next day, I started asking the residents around the villa. But instead of helping, some people just looked at me cynically. If there's nothing wrong, why are you living together? One of the men at the coffee shop said. I immediately became angry. Please watch your words. But the man just chuckled. The whole complex already knows. I almost hit him if the owner hadn't stopped us. My chest felt hot all the way home. I began to realize the slander had spread too far. And most painfully, people prefer to believe gossip than reality. When I arrived at the villa, I saw Aunt Maya sitting alone on the balcony, hugging her knees. She looked very tired. I'm tired, Dika, she said lihai. I sat down beside her slowly. Auntie must be strong. But everyone looks at me like a cheap woman now. Those words made my chest feel like it was stabbed. I'd never seen Aunt Maya this devastated. Previously, she, who was usually elegant and full of confidence, was now even afraid to leave the house. I immediately promised myself I must clear Aunt Maya's name by any means necessary. That night, I deliberately kept watch outside the villa. I was sure the perpetrator would come again. The clock showed almost 2 a.m. when the fog began to descend thicker. And sure enough, from behind the fence beside the villa, I saw a small light like a cell phone camera. Buck! I immediately ran after the figure. The person panicked and ran through the path to the small forest behind the villa. I continued to chase him, even though my breathing was getting heavy. Until finally, I managed to grab the man's jacket from behind. Brack! We both fell to the wet ground. The man immediately covered his face. However, I still had time. I saw clearly who he was. Reno, the caretaker of the empty villa next to Aunt Maya's house. You? I was immediately furious. So you're the one spreading all this slander? But Reno just laughed sarcastically. You guys are weird. I immediately grabbed his collar. Auntie and I never did anything. But Reno smiled mockingly. Just tell the villagers later. I almost beat him up that night. But suddenly, Reno pushed me hard and ran towards the main road. I tried to chase again, but stopped when I heard Aras scream. Dika. It was Aunt Maya's voice. My chest immediately pounded hard. I quickly ran back to the villa, and when I entered the house, my body immediately went limp. Aunt Maya fell near the stairs, crying in fear. On the floor nearby was an envelope containing our photos, printed in large red letters. Everyone will know your secret. The red writing on the photos looked like a threat deliberately made to destroy us slowly. My hands immediately trembled with anger. Meanwhile, Aunt Maya still sat weakly on the floor, crying in fear. Her face was pale. Her breath, her movements were irregular, and her body had been trembling since she found the envelope in front of the villa door. I quickly hugged her shoulders. Auntie, calm down. I'm here. However, Auntie Maya cried even harder. I can't take it anymore, Dika. Those words hurt so much. I stared at the photos scattered on the floor. All the pictures were taken secretly while I was accompanying Auntie Maya on the balcony, in the villa garden, and even when I helped her down the stairs. The angles of the photos were deliberately made to make it seem like our relationship was unnatural. I began to realize that Reno wasn't just spreading gossip. He really wanted to ruin Auntie Maya's life. That night, I took Auntie Maya into my room so she could calm down a bit. However, just a few minutes into our stay, my auntie's phone suddenly rang. It was a video from an unknown number. My hands went cold as I opened it, and the video showed Auntie Maya and me from a distance sitting together on the villa balcony at night. Then a large text appeared on the screen. Wait until tomorrow morning. Everyone in the complex will see this. Auntie Maya immediately covered her mouth, crying. Oh God. I clenched my fist so tightly that my nails almost cut my palms. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. That same night, I went to look for Reno at the empty villa where he worked. The mountain mist was getting thicker. The cold air pierced my bones. But my emotions were far hotter than the night air. When I arrived at the empty villa, I immediately broke down the back door. Bang! Reno came out! It was dark and messy inside. Drink bottles were scattered on the floor. And a few seconds later, Reno came out with a sneer. You came too. I immediately hit him without thinking. Bang! Reno fell to the floor. Why are you doing all this? I shouted angrily. But Reno just laughed. Do you think people will believe your relationship is normal? I grabbed his collar again. Aunt Maya is just my family? But you look like a couple? That sentence made my emotions explode. I almost hit him again if Reno suddenly said something that made me freeze. I actually like Aunt Maya. Bro. I immediately fell silent. Reno laughed bitterly while wiping the blood from his lips. I've always liked her, but she never looks at me. My chest started to feel tight. That's why you spread slander. I just wanted her to be destroyed. I was completely out of patience that night. But before I could do anything, my phone suddenly rang loudly. Aunt Maya's name appeared on the screen. For some reason, my heart started pounding uncomfortably. I immediately picked up the phone. Hello, Auntie. But what I heard was the panicked cries of the complex security guard. Mustika, hurry back to the villa. Why? Mrs. Maya had fainted. My body immediately went cold. I hurriedly left Reno and ran out to the villa in the pouring rain. The whole way, my thoughts were in disarray. I was afraid something had happened to Aunt Maya. I was afraid I would be too late, and my fears turned out to be true. When I arrived at the villa, I saw Aunt Maya lying weakly on the sofa with a pale bluish face. Beside her was a bottle of sleeping pills spilled on the floor. My legs immediately went weak. Auntie! I immediately hugged her cold body, frantically asking for help. Aunt Maya's breathing was very weak. Her eyes were half closed. And in a barely audible voice, she whispered softly in my ear. Sorry, Auntie. I'm just tired. Aunt Maya's voice sounded so weak, I could barely hear it. My chest immediately felt crushed. I hugged her body tightly, while continuing to call her name frantically. Auntie, don't close your eyes. Auntie hears me. But her body grew limp in my arms. Her hands were cold. Her breaths were shallow. I was truly terrified that night. Without thinking, I immediately carried Auntie Maya out of the villa to the car while screaming for help from the complex security guard. The rain was pouring down. The mountain fog was getting thicker. But I continued driving as fast as I could to the nearest hospital with trembling hands. Throughout the journey, I kept talking to Auntie Maya to stay conscious. Auntie must be strong. Auntie can't leave me. My tears even fell uncontrollably when I saw her face growing paler. When we arrived at the emergency room, the doctor immediately took Auntie Maya into the emergency room. Meanwhile, I could only stand outside in my drenched clothes and my mind in disarray. I began to blame myself. If only I hadn't come to the villa, if only I had stopped Reno sooner, maybe Auntie Maya wouldn't be this devastated. A few minutes later, the police arrived. It turned out that the complex security guard had reported Reno after learning about all the terror and slander that had been going on. And that night, Reno successfully arrested. The police found dozens of secret photos of Aunt Maya on his cell phone. There was even evidence of threatening messages that had been sent to us. Everything was finally revealed. Reno admitted to being hurt because his love was rejected by Aunt Maya several years ago. Since Aunt Maya's divorce from Uncle Rudy, Reno began to become obsessed and used my presence to create slander. My chest immediately felt hot hearing it. Thus someone almost destroyed Aunt Maya's life just because of obsession and revenge. But in the midst of all that, I was still more afraid of losing Aunt Maya tonight. Hour after hour seemed very slow in the hospital corridor. Until finally, the doctor came out of the treatment room. I immediately stood up with bated breath. Doctor, how is my aunt? The doctor took off his glasses slowly and said, Fortunately, the patient was quickly taken to the hospital. My legs immediately went weak with relief. She was experiencing severe mental stress and a mild overdose of sleeping pills. But now her condition is starting to stabilize. My tears immediately fell. I bowed my head and said thank you over and over again. And a few moments later, I was finally allowed into the treatment room. Aunt Maya looked very weak on the white hospital bed. But when she saw me coming, she slowly smiled a little. I immediately sat beside her and held her hand tightly. Forgive me, he whispered softly. I shook my head quickly. It wasn't Auntie's fault. Auntie Maya's tears fell again. I'm just too lonely. Those words made my chest feel tighter. All this time, people only saw the luxury of the villa in Auntie Maya's life, but no one knew how lonely she was every night after everyone left her. I held her hand tighter. Now Auntie wasn't alone anymore. Auntie Maya cried softly that night. But for the first time, after all the slander had destroyed our lives, those tears weren't because of fear, but because finally there was someone who truly understood her pain. A few days later, things started to improve. The police officially named Reno as a suspect for spreading slander and terror. Residents of the complex who had insulted Auntie Maya began to feel ashamed after learning the truth. Even some mothers came to apologize directly to the villa. Meanwhile, Uncle Rudy, for the first time since their divorce, came to visit Auntie Maya in the hospital. I still remember how Uncle Rudy stood for a long time in front of the treatment room door, with red eyes full of regret. I believe people too easily, he said softly. Auntie Maya only cried with a small smile. And that night, for the first time, the mountain villa didn't feel as lonely as before. Because after all the slander, tears, and pain that nearly destroyed our lives, Aunt Maya had finally found people who truly cared about her.